Good morning, DawgNation. I am Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Breda Pest Management. Fun show on the way. If you're not a Georgia fan, and every now and then we do have some non-Georgia fans who tune in, a good number of non-Georgia fans who tune in on a fairly regular basis. If you're not a Georgia fan, I have really bad news for you. It looks like that Georgia right now, led by Kirby Smart, is perhaps more energized than it's ever been in terms of going on a run of talent acquisition, perhaps unmatched by anything in this program's history thus far in the Smart era. We're going to use a joke by Lane Kiffin as a springboard into that. There's also really big news with a recruit who is not committed to Georgia and until recently probably hasn't been sort of thought of in Georgia circles perhaps all that much, but now who knows. That plus Mike Griffith on the show and a whole lot more fun in store there as well. So what do you say we get it started? It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Breda Pest Management, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Breda Pest Management, the official pest control of UGA Athletics.
Presented by DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
So we talked yesterday a little bit about the possibility with Travaris Robinson coming into Georgia as safeties coach, co-defensive coordinator, a guy who has a tie with Alabama's best player, Caleb Downs, that, hey, maybe if Caleb Downs would consider transferring, maybe Georgia, who missed out on getting Downs the first time around when he went to Alabama, maybe Georgia would have a second chance, and maybe the Dogs could make good on that second chance. We've even had some reporting, serious Capital J journalist Tom Van Haren saying it's a possibility that Downs could consider leaving Alabama, and if he did, Georgia would be in the mix. It's all really interesting. I don't necessarily have anything new for you on that topic here today, other than just to kind of remind you that it is out there, it's interesting, and if you missed yesterday's show, it's worth going back and checking that out for that reason. But what I do have, in light of that discussion and it being ongoing, the idea, well, of course, Georgia would want a chance at a guy like Downs. He's a terrific player, and Kirby Smart, of course, is always trying to do whatever he can do to get in the mix for players like this. I thought that Lane Kiffin had a very funny post on the platform now called X. I, for the most part, still call it Twitter. I just feel like that's a little easier to say. For some reason, X doesn't exactly roll off the tongue for me necessarily, but it is officially called X, formerly known as Twitter, I believe you're supposed to say. But either way, Lane Kiffin laughing in this. So a guy named Georgia Bull Doge, which I believe is a cryptocurrency reference, Georgia Bull Doge, puts on Twitter, find someone that looks at you like Kirby Smart looks at Caleb Downs, going back to their time after the SEC championship. Nice embrace here. Kirby coming in for the real thing, so to speak, and really spending some time there with Caleb Downs after that game to let him know what a great player he thought he was and all the kind pleasantries. And so Lane Kiffin sees this, retweets it, and with the laughing emoji there. So Kiffin laughing at the idea that Kirby Smart was using his time after the SEC championship to perhaps recruit Caleb Downs. Now, here's what I'm here to tell you, that this is not the first time this thing has sort of gone on between Kirby and Lane Kiffin before. A lot of y'all know Lane Kiffin is not always my cup of tea. I don't find him to be a very serious person. Now, I think it's fun to have a funny personality, things like that, especially on social media. But in terms of like taking that next step and being like a real coach in full, you know, a serious coach that you would take seriously, Kiffin always stops short of sort of being that guy for me. But admittedly, some of the things that Kiffin does, I do laugh at. This is an example of that. When I saw this yesterday, I did kind of laugh at it. The idea that Kiffin, who's been pretty active kind of making fun of Alabama a little bit in the early days, the Kalen DeBoer era, also took some time to sort of put this out there as well. And Kirby in the past, when it comes to stuff like this, has sort of always chosen to be a pretty good sport about this kind of stuff. There was the thing going back a couple of springs ago, around Father's Day, I guess it would have been, when there was the meme of like Nick Saban holding Kirby Smart like he was a baby. Obviously, the reference there to the idea that Saban was Kirby's daddy and stuff like that. And when Kirby's been asked about this kind of stuff, he's always been pretty good-natured about it and acknowledging that a lot of this sort of back and forth ribbing is the kind of thing that these younger coaches do via text messages and things like that all the time. In fact, let me go back to 2021 when one of those early like Kiffin memes sort of popped up making fun of Kirby, the sort of good-natured way in which Kirby handled that in the past. Let me let you hear this.
I'll give Lane this. He didn't post that unwarranted. I mean, we have a legendary side thread that goes on between Lane and I. So he sent that on the side thread long before he posted it on Twitter. So I know he does it for reaction and for entertainment. We spent several years together there at Alabama, and that's another one of his ways of taking a shot back at me, because he used to get whoopings when we were there. I didn't get the same whippings he got. So he's trying to get his jabs back.
I've said this before. I like the fact that Kirby has friends. I like the fact that Kirby, who does a very abnormal job, and he does it with an abnormal level of intensity, more on that in a moment, I like that Kirby has friends. I think friends keep you grounded, and I don't mind Lane Kiffin making fun of Kirby Smart, because if Lane Kiffin makes fun of Kirby Smart, and that makes Kirby Smart a little bit more of a normal guy in the midst of a very abnormal set of circumstances, being the leader of such a powerful organization, Georgia football, I think in a roundabout way that's sort of good. You need people in your life to keep you grounded, and Kirby's coaching friends, guys on his staff like Bobo, Muschamp, guys around the SEC that he's worked with in the past, such as Lane Kiffin. I think those guys, to a degree, help keep Kirby grounded, make it feel like it's always felt, even when they were younger and less highly paid than they are now. In a roundabout way, I think that's a good thing. And the fact that Kirby's not so super serious that he can't laugh at himself. You like the video the other day, and this is not to disrespect Taylor Swift, but the one where she was, I guess, made fun of on the Golden Globes Awards, and she had no smile about that at all. Listen, I'm not trying to get the Swifties after me here. I'm just saying that there are some people that sort of achieve a certain level of status, and they think it's impossible to imagine that anyone would ever laugh at them or want to kind of poke fun at them. Kirby Smart is not quite Taylor Swift level famous, but he's obviously on top of the college football world, but he's not so super serious or sort of self-involved that he can't have a little fun at his own expense. I think that's probably a pretty good thing and probably a pretty healthy thing. But beyond that, the picture that Lane Kiffin shares there of Kirby Smart and, perhaps trying to get a little word in with Caleb Downs there, I think what that really is more of an embodiment of the kind of spirit that exists around Georgia. And listen, if you're not a Georgia fan, I've got some bad news for you. On the heels of 2 straight national championships, and with Nick Saban stepping away and kind of a new landscape around college football, if you think that Georgia was going to use this as a time to perhaps kick back and relax, maybe rest on laurels, I think right now you're about to find out how not true that is. We talked a little bit last week about this massive recruiting weekend that Georgia was hosting as a way of really kind of kicking off that 2025 recruiting cycle. And, boy, things must have gone really well there, because we have seen a lot of decommitments from recruits who attended that weekend since then. In fact, let me show you the first one here. It's Mason Short, big-time Alabama offensive line prospect, had been committed to the Crimson Tide, but yesterday announced that he was decommitting from Alabama, fresh off to visit to UGA. Now, Short is a big deal. This is the kind of elite offensive line talent that really acts as a separator between a program like Georgia and those competing to try to get alongside Georgia, and the guys like Mason Short that you want to have in your program that help make you the kind of dominant line of scrimmage program we've grown to see UGA be. So Short visits Georgia. Right after that, he decommits from Alabama, and then I'm talking about the ink is barely dry on the decommitment graphic, and all of a sudden you've got Mason Short sharing this on his Twitter of the Kirby copter landing right there at Mason Short's high school, bringing that thing down for a landing and taking a visit to see. I mean, this is the energy that Kirby Smart's working with right now. It's not just Caleb Downs in December. It's Mason Short fresh off an Alabama decommitment. In fact, we can watch the video here if you're watching here live, and then you see the photos here of Kirby and Short together and the family. At one point in time, Mason Short saying that his mom looks like pretty happy there to see Kirby Smart there in this spot. So this gives you an idea of kind of how things are going here right now, that Kirby Smart gets the decommitment from Mason Short, flies out to see him in the Kirby copter, poses for the pictures. Everybody's all smiling. This is how quick things are operating right now when it comes to Kirby Smart jumping on the Mason Short situation there right there. But that's not the only decommitment as of late from a recruit that visited Georgia this past weekend. You've got Chris Ewald, the defensive back, who had been a Michigan commit. Well, we've also gotten the last couple of days the announcement from him that he is decommitting from Michigan, fresh off a Georgia visit. So once again, Lane Kiffin laughs at Kirby Smart for the way that Kirby's kind of going out there and perhaps chasing down Caleb Downs, fresh off the Nick Saban retirement. But that's not the only iron that Smart's got in the fire right now. It's Mason Short, it's perhaps Chris Ewald, and then to add sort of to that, the recruit we've been talking about now for a while, last, couple of years, or not couple of years, but last year at least, is perhaps the most important recruit of all that's out there. And this was true at times for, guys who were committed in 2024, guys who could be out there in 2025. We've said perhaps the most important recruit for Georgia in this upcoming cycle is a guy like Elijah Griffin, defensive lineman, 5-star from the Savannah area, that Georgia's need to make sure it continues to win with these elite defensive line prospects. Griffin's not the only one, but he's among the most, I think, well-known for this 2025 recruiting cycle, that Georgia's need to continue doing that going to be really important. And lo and behold, in the midst of all of this, you've got now Chad Simmons, respected reporter for On3. He's logging in an online prediction for Georgia to land Elijah Griffin, putting this in there this week here. So we've said Griffin may be the most important prospect that's out there for Georgia in the class of 2025, along with other line of scrimmage type guys on both offensive and defensive line. And lo and behold, once again, fresh off a very busy recruiting weekend for UGA, you've got respected recruiting reporters like Chad Simmons logging in their prediction that Griffin ends up at UGA. So the point here is, it's funny to see Lane Kiffin laughing at Kirby Smart for the way that Kirby Smart supposedly kind of chased down Caleb Downs after the SEC championship game, but that's not the only elite prospect Smart's trying to chase down here right now. It's Mason Short, it's perhaps Chris Ewald, it's Elijah Griffin, it's perhaps everybody else in between there as well, that Georgia shows no signs of slowing down here at all. And it is a sharp contrast. Obviously, we've all taken our time over the course of the last few days to recognize the legacy of Nick Saban, the greatness of his career, but it is over. And the career of Kirby Smart at Georgia, based on the actions here of this week, it may only just now really be getting started. Hey, DawgNation, I'm Brandon Adams, and obviously you're watching DawgNation Daily right now, and many of you are aware we've been kind of pre-recording the show in the early mornings just because we've had, some issues. By now you've heard all you want to hear about all of that. I am interrupting the broadcast right now because as we're speaking, and as we've alluded to now the last couple of days, it certainly appears that Caleb Downs is in the transfer portal. That process has begun. It certainly seems like he is on his way to being there. In fact, I think we've even got 24/7 Sports saying that he's now in the transfer portal. Obviously, as we've been saying the entire time, in the event that Downs goes in, Georgia would be a major player in all of this. We just talked about the fact that Kirby Smart right now seems to have Georgia in pursuit of an elite talent at a rate in which it's almost unmatched at any point in time in the history of this program. And Caleb Downs could be the next domino in all of that. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to get back into the live show. We're going to get back into the pre-recorded show we put together for you a little earlier. And then when we do the R.S. Andrews cooldown in a few minutes, we'll give you more of the details as we know them on the Caleb Downs situation, Alabama's best player going into the transfer portal, perhaps a strong target of the University of Georgia. More on that coming up in a moment. But for now, back to today's show. This point, but starting to really kind of look and feel like a studio. And once we're there, we're going to be able to kind of roll out and do the show live in our normal format the way we have for so many years. I am so excited about all of that. Really appreciate everyone behind the scenes who's working so hard to make this a possibility. It is just a great thing to be able to see. Can't wait to share that with you. Normally radio as well, and our friends Athens Sports Radio 96 The Ref. We love that. Podcast platforms all over the place there as well. A lot of ways for you to connect with the program. We're just really happy that you do. Really good stuff there on that front. And a huge thanks to our friends at Breda Pest Management who make all of this possible. The official pest control provider of UGA Athletics. That is what Breda Pest Management is all about. Now, it's cool to say you work with the company that works with UGA. When you're there at Sanford Stadium or Stegeman Coliseum. By the way, speaking of Stegeman Coliseum, how about a big win last night on the road for the Dogs at South Carolina? More on that in a moment. But the point is that it's cool to say, hey, you know the pest control company that takes care of Sanford Stadium and Stegman Coliseum and Foley Field and all those places, that's the same company that takes care of my house there as well. There's some prestige associated with that, a little bit of a bragging right to be able to say the company that UGA trusts is also the company that I trust, and that's all really good. But in addition to that, there is something in it for you when you make the switch to Breda Pest Management for your termite protection, perhaps, pest control. When you do so, you are going to put more money back in your pocket just for making that decision. Now, you may be saying, well, how is that possible? Everything lately is more expensive, and that seemingly is true. But what Breda provides is the kind of sort of heritage of success, in business since 1975, kind of a multi-generational family story. 125 employees sort of stretched out all across our market area. When you've had that kind of success for as long as Breda has, that gives them some resources to allow it to be leveraged for your benefit, meaning that because it's a successful company and because they've been doing this for a long time, they actually can offer you a higher level of service at a lower price. And so that's why you want to make the switch to Breda here today. So find them online. It's BredaPest.com. BREDA, BredaPest.com. The official pest control provider of UGA Athletics can be your termite company there as well. And you can make some money, put more money back in your pocket when you make the switch. So one more time, it's BredaPest.com, BREDA. All right, update from us coming up in a moment on a big, big fun thing we're doing here at DawgNation.com right now. We'll tell you more about that coming up. Our buddy Mike Griffith stops by to kind of catch up on all the news around UGA here as of late. And some fun here before we're done with the program, too. I'll tell you more about here in just a moment. Prior to that, though, let us go around the doghouse here today. And this is kind of a small thing at the moment because we don't quite know yet where this is going, but I do find it to be interesting. Many of you know that, kind of the top prospect in the state of Georgia over the course of the last couple of years has been a quarterback from Carrollton named Julian Lewis. It was last year that ESPN made a big thing about coming out and saying that Juju, which is what Lewis is kind of known by, kind of a nickname, that Lewis was the number one prospect in all of, high school football, regardless of grade, regardless of wherever, that Lewis was the number one prospect of all. At the time, he was just sort of beginning his sophomore season. Well, we have now found out that Lewis is actually reclassifying. Originally supposed to be a class of 2026 quarterback and really on his way to perhaps breaking all the records that, the guys like Aaron Philo from Prince Avenue from this past year, or Gunnar Stockton and Trevor Lawrence, they've all been a part of. Julian Lewis was really kind of on track to maybe break all those and go down as one of the most heralded quarterbacks in the history of the state of Georgia. And now that high school career for Lewis is actually going to end 1 year sooner. He has reclassified to the class of 2025, would essentially make this upcoming fall his last season of high school football. Now, this is interesting on a number of fronts. Lewis has been committed to USC, and I don't think I'm overstating things when I say the vibe around USC is completely different right now than it was before. I would say that Lincoln Riley's star as a coach seems to have fallen just a bit. I would say the USC program's prestige, at least for now, and I'm trying not to overstate this, but it seems to have been tarnished a bit. I mean, USC is sort of moving into the Big Ten for this upcoming year, and at one point in time, that was thought to be the big get for the league. But as it stands right now, the actual best team coming in from these former Pac-12 teams, it's really Oregon. And Washington's a team that played for the national championship, and while they are, from a business standpoint, thought to be somewhat of a lesser thing than USC and maybe even UCLA as well because of the L.A. tie there, the truth is on the field, USC took a big step back in comparison to, say, Oregon and Washington here this year. So one way or another, even before the reclassification from Lewis, sort of stood as kind of conventional wisdom that USC may have a hard time holding on to a player like this because USC as a program just doesn't quite feel the same way that it has. I think that's a real and legitimate discussion here right now. But where Georgia comes in on all of this is that when a guy like this reclassifies, you typically assume that he's reclassifying for a reason. And while we don't fully know all of Lewis's reasons, we do know this. It's being commonly reported right now, including Jeremy Johnson from On3 as well, that Lewis is going to take a visit to Georgia coming up on February 3rd. He said he's locked in his first visit as a 2025 target. So get the timeline on this. Get the symbolism on this. So it's announced that Lewis reclassifying to 2025. And the first act of business as a newly minted 2025 recruit, formerly 2026, is to take a visit to UGA. Now, listen, I'm someone who follows recruiting. I don't consider myself a recruiting reporter, nor do I think you should consider me a recruiting reporter. But I think we can all look at this and say, something feels like it's going on here. The timeline here would certainly lead you to believe there's a set of circumstances in place that is, really pretty fascinating here. And while I can't go as far to say that means that Julian Lewis is going to come to Georgia, I can tell you this. Lewis came to a lot of Georgia games this year. I saw him in Athens at least twice, may have been 3 times, but I saw him in Athens at least twice. So, during this fall, Lewis was still coming to a good number of Georgia games. Now, a lot of times when that happens, it's just a guy who wants to sort of be where the action is and, enjoy kind of a free ticket, chance to be fed and a chance to be, kind of rolled out the red carpet for. And so, not every recruit visit means something. I don't know how much the Lewis, visits to Athens this past fall necessarily meant, but it's at least something in that regard. And the other point I'll make for you here real quick is this, is that I think the idea that Georgia, fresh off, what kind of went wrong with Dylan Raiola, is kind of like right back on the horse again and looking at a guy like Julian Lewis, who's probably the better overall prospect anyway, and now looking at him for the class of 2025 as opposed to the class of 2026. I do think that tells you a little bit about the program growth of UGA. Like when you want to go back to early days of Kirby Smart, you're thinking about, a lot of defense, a lot of running the ball, but really, in terms of perception, the idea of the full offense, the passing game in particular, that was a little bit of an area that kind of lagged behind perception, these, other facets of the program. But we saw Stetson Bennett become a Heisman finalist here, and we see Carson Beck coming back for his senior year on the sort of the short list. I believe he, along with a couple of other guys, are kind of the shortest list of favorites for this year's Heisman Trophy. That Georgia has achieved a status at the quarterback position now that sort of matches what it's been able to do at other positions there too. So keep that in mind as the reason why Georgia is able to even get involved with a quarterback like Lewis. Like when Julian first sort of made his decision to go to USC, the idea was, well, USC is a far better program for quarterbacks than Georgia is. But since then, we've seen great success for Stetson Bennett. We've seen great success for Carson Beck. We believe we're going to see more. And some of these other programs that have had quarterback but not much else, all of a sudden the stature of those programs seems to be falling. So I don't know where things are going to go with Lewis here. I really don't. But I do know this, is that Georgia stands on much more equal footing with any program when it comes to competing for quarterbacks than it has in the past, and that certainly means something. And that is around the doghouse on DawgNation Daily here today. Now, we're going to talk to Mike Griffith. Before we do on that, let me remind you of what you can do at DawgNation.com right now. Many of you know that next week I'm looking forward to being on board Icon of the Seas. Not to brag, but I get to be one of the first people to put my feet on this brand new cruise ship. It's going to be a great experience. And all of that is, for me, is sort of a wet the whistle appetizer for the big event that's going to take place in April when we're all on board the DawgNation cruise together. And the good news is, courtesy of our friends at Kroger, what an amazing thing this is for Kroger to do this. This is just sort of Kroger saying we want to take good care of our DawgNation audience and just sort of do something nice, give everybody a chance to win. One person going to be a lucky winner here. So if you go to DawgNation.com, you can register for your chance here. Now, we try to make things as simple as possible. So when you find the link right there at the top of the page at DawgNation.com, simply click into that. And when you do, you'll just give us your name, your information, and you're going to tell us your favorite Brock Bowers moment. And of all the selections that we get, someone is going to be drawn at random as the winner there on that. And you and a guest are going to join us on board Allure of the Seas for our DawgNation cruise coming up in April. Now, obviously, there's still some space for you to be a part of the DawgNation cruise if you don't, like your chances of winning here on this. And if you're already signed up for the DawgNation cruise, well, if you happen to be the winner, you can still sign up for this. If you happen to be the winner, then we'll just sort of credit your cruise for you there on that. So it's a great opportunity for everybody to have their chance to win the DawgNation cruise coming up in April. So enter for your chance to win. We'll draw one of those winners coming up here at DawgNation.com, courtesy of our friends at Kroger. That is ongoing at DawgNation.com. So please make sure you check that out today. What an exciting thing that is going to be. All right, before we're done here today, I think I have an idea for how we can bring a truce between Alabama fans and Georgia fans. There's been a little bit of a warring faction among these groups here right now. So, in the light of the DeBoer era and the end of the Saban era, Alabama fans are a little antsy here. So I'm going to see if I can sort of bring fans together before it's all said and done on our program today. But for now, when it comes to everything going on with Georgia football, coaching hire being made, busy on the recruiting front and all kinds of excitement going on. Let's cover a lot of those bases right now as we welcome in Mike Griffith here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
We will say hello to Mike Griffith here on DawgNation Daily here today, presented by Breda Pest Management. And Mike, appreciate your time. It's really been interesting around Georgia as of late, and we'll kind of jump right into this. You know, Georgia on Saturday, we find out kind of out of nowhere, is hiring Travaris Robinson as a safeties coach and a co-defensive coordinator. Will Muschamp sort of stepping into an off-field role, remaining with the program. Then it seems like Robinson may rethink that, go back to Alabama. Then Georgia kind of wins the battle to keep T-Rob. Sort of a wild swing of news there over the course of 24, 48, 72 hours. What did you make of how all of that played out?
Surprising in some respects, because we thought he was already hired, and then it turns out that Alabama gets another interview with him. It's almost as if Nick Saban called over to Kalen DeBoer and said, wait a minute, you let that guy go? Get him back over here for an interview. But Kirby had already made the sell. Obviously, Will Muschamp had a lot of influence. T-Rob, a guy that was Will's protege at Florida, at South Carolina. It just, you know, it's such a big hire. And because of the coaching change in Alabama, I think it put a lot more attention on this. I mean, we do pay attention to coaching changes during the offseason, and assistant coaches commonly change schools. But this was magnified, I think, Brandon, because of the nature of where Alabama's at, the struggle that we all anticipate DeBoer will have to fill Nick Saban's shoes, particularly since he's still in them. And this was clearly a win for Georgia. I mean, somebody was going to win and somebody was going to lose in a very public showdown for T-Rob.
Yeah, to me it comes down to, and I say this all the time, that when it comes to like the very best recruiting assistant coaches, it's a little bit like the very best players. There are never enough of them to go around. That's the nature of college football. There is a scarcity of resource, and the very best programs tend to hoard more than their fair share. And so Travaris Robinson, knowledge of the SEC, recruits know him there as well. You know, there's a reason why a guy like this is coveted by multiple programs, is because, you know, he is one of that sort of rare category that's capable of burning the candle at both ends, capable of forging the relationships that matter here. And so, you know, the idea that Georgia had to go through a little bit of a wrestling match to keep him, that doesn't bother me, because I think ultimately it's good to win a battle like this. And the very best programs are going to be defined by the kinds of coaching hires they're capable of making. So, you know, the idea this thing got a little muddy towards the end there, to me, that's just the nature of all is fair in the SEC. And I think, as far as I'm concerned, it's a credit to Georgia for striking fast, maybe before DeBoer, you know, fully got his sea legs underneath him there to swoop in here and get, as you said, a coach that clearly would have had some value remaining in Tuscaloosa as well.
No question, Brandon, and I'll tell you, it really does make you question how involved Nick Saban is, because for all the talk about Nick Saban being right there and having an office, Bryant-Denny Stadium, and DeBoer seeking his wisdom, to me this was a massive fumble by Alabama. This guy should have never been let go. This should have been a priority for Kalen DeBoer when he first took over. Clearly he was not. Now they're bringing in a coach who was the head coach at South Alabama, who coached with DeBoer at Indiana, kind of another outsider there, if you will. So there was a lot of takeaways from this, but to your point, the big takeaway is that the Georgia coaching staff got better. The reason it got better is because, you know, Coach Muschamp's in a position where he wants to see his son play in Nashville. He wants more family time. They were going to have to make a move on that staff, and getting his understudy, getting his protege, to me is just it's optimal, Brandon. And for the people that are listening, and I know not everybody gets into assistant coach news, all you need to do is think about the last time Georgia lost a home game. It was in 2019. Think about that. That's just an amazing stat.
Yeah.
Well, T-Rob was the defensive coordinator. He worked with the secondary there. And this year, when we think about Carson Beck and some of the struggles he had in the SEC championship game, T-Rob's cornerbacks, both projected first-round picks. This guy has produced a lot of talent. He's universally respected as a former Auburn All-SEC safety, a guy that played in the NFL, ties to Miami where he's from. I mean, really, if you're drawing up a high-profile assistant coach, I think I'd make him about 42 years old, which T-Rob is. I just don't think Georgia could have done any better for this position.
And I love, speaking as a Georgia fan, of course, I love Will Muschamp sticking around. I like the fact that his voice is still going to be in the program. And I also respect the idea that, at this stage of his life, he's made a lot of money. He's been a head coach 2 different places. He's now ready to enjoy a little bit more of the family part of this. And, Mike, I got to tell you, I like it that family means something to the Georgia coaches. I said this the other day. Those of us who are UGA fans expect the Georgia coaches to work hard. That's what the SEC requires. But hopefully none of us say, we need you to abandon your family and completely miss out on the milestone moments for your kids in order to make Georgia football better, because the honest truth is, whatever extra work you're doing that takes you away from your family and seeing your sons grow up, that's probably not making Georgia all that much better anyway at that point in time. So I like the idea that Georgia coaches value family. I like the idea that Muschamp sees an opportunity to be a little closer to his son as he gets a chance to be an SEC football player. What a cool thing that is. Obviously, Muschamp enjoyed, seeing Jackson play in the Orange Bowl, which I think was probably the most fun moment for me in the entire game almost. The point is that I love that these hard-driving Georgia coaches also seem to value the role that family plays in their lives, and I think that's something we should all pay close attention to.
Oh, no doubt. And that's part of the culture, I think, that Kirby's created. When you think about what makes Georgia go, we talk about the connectedness. And listen, it all sounds good, Brandon. All these coaches are going to talk about being connected, right? But when the proof is in the pudding, and when Georgia went down to the Orange Bowl, not in the college football playoff, very disappointed to become the first team in history to drop from number 1 out of the top 4, despite only losing by 3 points. They were upset. They were disappointed, but they opted in. They said, you know what, we're going to handle this adversity by staying together, finishing together. Even though Marius Mims and Brock Bowers couldn't play in the game, they were on the sideline. I mean, think about that. Florida State's guy, they're nowhere to be found. They had 9 guys opted out. And how did they handle adversity? And to me, that's where you see who learned the lesson. You see who has the family atmosphere. Because, as you said, I mean, if coaches have a family atmosphere and prioritize their own family, that's going to carry over into the football building because, they kind of become, parents for these kids, for lack of a better word, while they're away, while they're training. They're advisors. They're there to hear their troubles. And it's a very close-knit, connected Georgia program. And to me, that was a winning edge it's been a winning edge. And I don't know what next year's team will look like. I don't know the chemistry yet. That's all yet to play out. But bringing in a guy like T-Rob, and as you said, keeping Muschamp associated with the program, hard to know how much he'll actually be involved. His role is as an analyst. I think he'll still be around for a bit, certainly in the off season. To me, it couldn't have been a better situation.
So let me ask you about the Kalen DeBoer situation in Alabama and obviously the aftermath of the Nick Saban retirement. I think you and I both like to have strong opinions, but I believe the only correct opinion about DeBoer right now is we don't know. On the one hand, this is a guy that's really won a lot. Played for the national championship here this year, beat Dan Lanning twice. Lanning's a coach, I think, that's on the rise, and DeBoer beat him twice here this year. So in terms of actually winning games on the field, the credentials are there. But, this is a total outsider to this part of the country. As you alluded to a moment ago, most of the staff hires are not really familiar to SEC fans or SEC prospective player families. There's a lot of introductions that have to go on here. So on the one hand, you could be Urban Meyer, who came from the outside and had great success here. On the other hand, you could be Brian Harsin, I guess. So, is there one of these outcomes sort of more likely than another? And if you're a Georgia fan, how do you process this new era in Tuscaloosa, especially given the fact that Alabama is obviously on Georgia's schedule and the first SEC game for Kalen DeBoer as he begins his career down here?
Yeah, a lot to digest there for sure. Starting with DeBoer, and I'm with you. Small sample size. You say he beat Dan Lanning twice. Well, he was the head coach, or 3 times. I wonder. I've got to give Michael Penix some credit for those wins. He certainly did coach good with a Heisman Trophy runner-up quarterback and 2 or 3 NFL receivers. At Fresno State, he was 3-3 in the COVID year, and I think maybe 9-3 the next year. I want to say Jed Tedford went 10-4 the next year. So I don't know that Fresno State indicated that he was some wonderkind coach. I think it indicated that he was a pretty solid coach, and Washington said, okay, here's a guy that, won a lot of games in, the college football Little League up there at, the University of Sioux Falls, 1,400 enrollment. As I joked on the SEC network, Brandon, I mean, he had some impressive wins over Minot State, Southwest Minnesota, St. Cloud State, Winona State. That's, so I don't know what to make of that. I just don't know enough about football in South Dakota and Minnesota. I guess he'll be good in snow games. That cold weather offense. I don't know what to make of an impressive NAIA coaching career. But I know this: when Fresno State played at Alabama a few years back and lost 41-10, I don't remember anybody saying, that guy at Fresno State might be Alabama's coach one day.
Yeah.
So I'm with you. The sample size is small. Look, the guy's a Boy Scout. He was talking about his maxims the other day, and I think he realized he had a pretty tough crowd because he said one of our maxims is that winners win because that's what winners do. Brandon, I think you and I could come up with more inspirational post-game messages coaching our children's games. I know I certainly did, and I would certainly expect much more out of you with your speaking talents. So I wasn't impressed. But you know what? It's going to come down to the games. It's going to come down to how he fares against Georgia on September 28th. Bringing up Brian Harsin, I think it's a good comparison. Brian Harsin had established a great program for 7 years at Boise State. Remember, DeBoer was only at Washington 2 years. Did he really build that program? Harsin was at Boise 7 years, hired Mike Bobo, who he clashed with early and often, eventually split after 1 year, and then Derek Mason walked. So he brought in two really respected SEC coaches. I mean, Mason and Bobo are two of the best. I mean, they're can't miss guys with their scheming and coaching and play calls. And yet Harsin missed. So I feel like we've seen this experiment before. Say this for Greg Byrne, also interesting. Not afraid to leave the Southeast to make hires. I mean, Nate Oates has been a good hire for baseball. Well, that's basketball, you say. Okay, go to Buffalo for basketball. But the baseball coach came from Maryland. Okay, well, he was a two-time Big Ten Coach of the Year at Maryland. I don't know that DeBoer's resume is as proven as those two other hires. So there's questions. But final takeaway on DeBoer, there wasn't going to be a good hire. There wasn't going to be a hire that they made that you were going to go, yep, that's it. That's the guy. There is no evil Nick Saban twin out there. But I will say this. Dabo Swinney is a guy that should have got a look. Dabo Swinney should have got an interview. Dabo Swinney, the SEC has lost 4 games to teams from other conferences in the college football playoff in the 10-year history of the 4-team playoff. And by the way, Alabama was the only SEC team to lose to a team from another conference in the playoff. They lost to Ohio State. They lost to Michigan this year, and they lost twice to Clemson and Dabo Swinney. Dabo played at Alabama. Dabo loved it. This is a passion. This is a guy who lived in Bryant Hall with his mother. His mother moved in with him because of his family. This is a guy who absolutely dreams of Alabama, who built a very good program at Clemson, which is a hard place to build. Their facilities are, they're good now, but their NIL money doesn't stack up. He at least deserved a conversation, in my opinion. I think that's going to come back to haunt Greg Byrne if DeBoer doesn't work out. It's not going to be that you didn't hire a good coach. It's that maybe your search wasn't diverse enough. Number one, Mike Loxley was out there. And then number two, maybe not wide enough or thorough enough.
Let me squeeze in one more thing, about 30 seconds left here, Mike, and we certainly appreciate your time. Last night, away from the topic of football for a moment, Georgia goes on the road, fights against a South Carolina team, gets a road win in a place that's been tough on them in the past, a Gamecocks team that only lost twice before that. I've kind of joked here lately about being on the Georgia basketball bandwagon. I think this is sort of a real thing here right now. Tough game against Tennessee on Saturday. That's obviously sort of a deep run tournament-style team. But to bounce back from that loss, go on the road, win at South Carolina, I got to tell you, I think this basketball team is worth being taken seriously right now.
For sure. And they're going to be looked at as a fringe team. This moved them up to number 67 in the Ken Pom rankings. South Carolina was 64 going into this game and a projected number 8 seed. The fact that it was on the road is what means so much. Now, I will say, Brandon, Georgia started 3-1 last year. in the SEC. I do agree this team is cut and built differently. The schedule makers didn't do them any favors. It would have been nice to have another a nice mid SEC team up next, but instead they've got to go to Rupp Arena on Saturday. And my goodness, what a gigantic challenge! But it's a long season. And to your point, they battled Tennessee. I think that Tennessee is the best team in the league. Had that game in hand seemingly. But Dalton Connect, this rising superstar and future NBA first-round draft pick, just had one of those incredible performances. Like Mike White says, sometimes good offense beats good defense. Remains to be seen how they play down the stretch. But I'm with you. Hey, this is a team that's winning basketball games, and I love the mix. All right, a lot of these guys are going to be playing in Europe or NBA developmental leagues. There's no Anthony Ant-Man Edwards out there, although Silas Demery Jr. is rising quickly, this freshman. But I love the mix of veteran players that are on their second, third, and final chances, that have played at other schools, that have one more chance for collegiate basketball relevancy. If they can turn Georgia basketball into an NCAA tournament team, as I've said, the media guide is littered with pages of basketball guys that have tried and failed at Georgia, and all you really hear about them is an occasional social media shout out. These guys have a chance. Legends is probably a strong word, but have a chance to be remembered. If they can get Georgia back in the NCAA tournament, and this is big for Mike White too, let's be honest. His star was on the fade at Florida. He got out while the getting was still somewhat good and found a welcoming home at Georgia with an athletic director that was willing to put the resources behind him and give him another opportunity to prove that he was a good hire to replace Billy D down there at Florida. That he is a guy who can coach deep into the future in the SEC. Mike White has that look, a former player like Kirby Smart, a bit of a Boy Scout himself, I suppose, when you talk with him. But this guy just loves basketball. His closet is clean. You want to talk about family, certainly the White family, a tremendous athletic family in the SEC. So I like the story. I like where it's going. Can't wait to hear you talk more about it on DawgNation Daily.
Oh, we're all in on the bandwagon right now, Mike. Thanks for being here. Appreciate your time. And we will look forward to speaking to you soon on DawgNation Daily, presented by Braided Pest Management. Mike, thanks a lot.
You got it.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Yeah, if you are on the Georgia basketball bandwagon, I need you to slide towards the middle because there's some other folks hopping on. I'm not trying to make too much out of a win against South Carolina, but these are the sort of road wins in the past that Georgia just didn't get. And, perhaps, coming off, the Tennessee game was very winnable, and obviously, this is sort of the story of college basketball. You play well at home. You have a chance to win that game against a marquee opponent. You let it slip away. Could have very easily let that hangover hurt you in Columbia last night, but it didn't. And so that, my friends, is a very good thing. Here's what else is good. How about cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean? A lot of you know, on board Icon of the Seas next week. Now, this is one of those things that I do for all of you because I want to be able to come back and tell you all about it. I do believe it's going to be a brand new horizon in the cruise vacation experience. Royal Caribbean completely redefining things with Icon of the Seas, and I can't wait to tell you more about that. It's going to be so much fun. But I also want you to be aware of what's going to go down with Allure of the Seas on our DawgNation cruise coming up in April. Now, all of this, Jessica Slater's, she's even better at talking about this than I am, believe it or not. Great travel agent, specially selected for us when it comes to all of our Royal Caribbean cruise vacation needs. Jessica's always the one I'm turning to there for that. So give Jessica a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. Email her, jslater@dreamvacations.com. Now, when you talk to her, tell her two things. Say, BA's been talking about Icon of the Seas. Tell me why Icon with the Aquadome and all the cool stuff that's going to be debuting on that brand new cruise ship. Tell me why that's so cool, and tell me when I can get on board. And, oh, yeah, tell me about this DawgNation cruise there as well, because I continue to be hearing about a lot of folks locking in and being a part of this DawgNation cruise. Hundreds of you have already done it. We're going to have the largest crowd we've ever taken on a DawgNation cruise. Can't wait to do all of that with you. So royaldogs.com for more on that. All right, we're going to kind of bounce through some of this a little bit quickly here today, but there is plenty of news to give you, including Texas adding another wide receiver from the transfer portal. This time it's Silas Bolden. Big numbers last year, or at least big-ish numbers last year for Oregon State. This goes along with Isaiah Bond, who they already brought in. And it's interesting to me here on a couple of fronts. A, we have seen Georgia kind of use the transfer portal as a method for bringing in experienced wide receivers. And now we sort of see Texas kind of doing the same thing here. And it's also, I would say, for the Longhorns, in what is going to be Quinn Ewers' final year of the program, in the first year of the SEC, one of the things that Texas did really well this year, which create explosive plays for wide receivers, this is their way of saying, we want that to continue here in the SEC. You saw Steve Sarkisian on the screen a moment ago if you're watching on video, and that is a guy that I think is perhaps ready to take sort of a next step in his coaching career. Got to the college football playoff here this year. Seems more fully cemented at Texas than any job he's had in the past. And the next step for him is being competitive and successful in the SEC. The recipe that worked in the final year of the Big 12 in 2023, good receiver play, they're bringing that with them to 2024. Bond, now Bolden, some pretty interesting names coming into Texas as wide receiver transfers. By the way, another SEC team, obviously, trying to make some noise with some new stuff going on. That's Alabama. Kalen DeBoer continuing to work on his coaching hires. The latest report, I don't think this is official yet, but I believe it will be likely by the time our show begins. Maurice Linguist was the Buffalo head coach. So after bringing in Womack, the South Alabama head coach as defensive coordinator, it looks like DeBoer is going to turn to another sitting head coach as a defensive assistant, in this case, Maurice Linguist. So Linguist did not have a great record at Buffalo, 3-9 or something like that. So it's not like he's necessarily a head coach on the rise, but he is a head coach. And so this will be one of the things that DeBoer has a chance to sell. All of these guys who've been head coaches, who were head coaches, here to become Alabama assistants. As I told Mike Griffith a moment ago, we have no idea how any of this is going to play out. But here is the one deal I'm willing to make with Alabama fans, because they're kind of going back and forth. Georgia fans kind of going back and forth. There's a lot of hotly contested conversations taking place, among fans right now. When it comes to the Kalen DeBoer era, this is the concession I'm willing to make. DeBoer is as good a coach as Alabama fans say he is. That's the concession I'm willing to make. But if that's true today, that's also true in September, October, November. Because here's the thing that Georgia fans have noticed. And Alabama fans haven't been through this because Nick Saban's been employed for such a long time. See, Georgia fans who've been around the block a couple of times can remember when Florida fans were telling us how good Jim McElwain was. And then eventually Florida fans were telling us that Jim McElwain was the problem, but the solution was going to be Dan Mullen, how good Dan Mullen is. But then they were telling us, well, no, actually Mullen's the problem. It's Billy Napier. That's the solution. And now most of those fans are sort of telling us something a little bit different. So the point here is this. If you're an Alabama fan and you think Kalen DeBoer is the best coach of all time, hiring the best, most capable, competent staff of all time, we believe you on that. You can have your say on that. But we're going to check back in September, October, November, my mentions on social media, your message boards, everything else in between. What are you saying then? That's what we're going to be watching pretty closely to see. So that's the truce I'm willing to make with all of you. And then a couple of other stories real quick. We talked about Ross Bjork yesterday. That's now official. A guy with no real significant professional achievements whatsoever continues to climb the professional ladder somehow. Now athletic director at Ohio State, so I guess we wish him luck as he does that. Interesting transfer within the SEC. Sees former Auburn quarterback Robbie Ashford going to South Carolina. Don't quite know what this means to the Gamecocks necessarily, although I do believe that Ashford is certainly a very capable athlete. But exactly how he's going to fit into what Dowell Loggins wants to do on the offensive side of the ball there, I don't know that I fully know that. But Ashford making the move there to South Carolina. And then speaking of familiar names, LSU ready to hire a familiar name there too. Fresh off a stint at Florida that did not go very well. Corey Raymond now going back to the area in the country that he's the most comfortable there on the Bayou. Once again rehired as LSU defensive backs coach. So keeping in mind here, a lot of big high-profile hires for LSU. Bringing Blake Baker as defensive coordinator, bringing Bo Davis over from Texas as defensive line coach. That's a really big hire. And getting Raymond back, that'll be well received in Louisiana there. So that is a piece of news worth noting. And that is also cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Now, before we wrap up here on a Wednesday, let me remind you that if you're having some fun here this weekend, you're going to watch some of the playoffs, professional football, or settling in for some college basketball, or just hanging out with friends and family, no better thing to bring with you on all of that than the great taste of the Finnish long drink. It's a ready-to-drink cocktail. Comes in a can, sort of looks like a beer, but it's not. It's a ready-to-drink cocktail. and it's, I think, the best tasting beverage in that category. It's a fun category of beverage from a flavor standpoint. We think the Finnish long drink dominates in all of that, and there's a bunch of different varieties you can try. The long drink cranberry, the long drink strong, 8.5% alcohol by volume, long drink zero, no carbs, no sugar, long drink, traditional, the blue can, the grapefruit flavor, the gin kick. That's probably, even after all these years, still my favorite. So make sure you go to thelongdrink.com. You can find out where to pick some up today, and you can enjoy yourself some Finnish long drink. And as we wrap up here today on a Wednesday, a couple of golden shoes to give out. Our good friend Celicia Gagnon shared this with us. Obviously, a lot of former dogs up in Philadelphia, so representing UGA, you got Celicia and her husband up there to see that. Said just a couple of dogs visiting Philly. Hashtag Go Dogs, hashtag Philly Dogs, Golden Shoe, DawgNation, and then tagging at DawgNation Daily. Celicia, we love to see that. Hope you guys had a good time up there in Philadelphia. Hope you stayed warm, although down here right now, it's probably about as cold down here as it typically is in Philadelphia. So glad to see you having fun on that. Also, yesterday, we gave a golden shoe to Sugar Ray. I always like when Sugar Ray does this. He takes a victory lap after he wins a golden shoe. You see there all his golden shoes that he's won. Me celebrating alongside with him. Very funny. He says, shout out to Brandon Adams for presenting me with my 9th Golden Shoe Award yesterday. I couldn't have done it without the total collapse of Bama football. Very funny stuff. Sugar Ray, a very funny dude. You love to see that. Lousy, stinking Gators, you don't love to see this. 1,166 days. That is how long it's been since Florida's beaten Georgia. That is our Gator Hater Updater. And we'll see you back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management.
And on video, time now for the RS Andrews cool down. And if you guys can only see the moving parts we've had going on around here to kind of get all of this together so we could have this live conversation here right now. As I broke into the show, which I believe is a DawgNation Daily first. Now, listen, we love being live. It's obviously very important to us. We've had some issues lately where that's not been as easy to do. So to create the show in the normal form, we've been doing some early morning pre-records, but we broke into programming. So essentially, if my ego wasn't already big enough, I am breaking in live to my own show to give an update on what's going on. But in all seriousness, there is new news to report. We talked about this as a possibility yesterday, and now it's a real thing. We'll bring in Connor Riley here. So Connor, as a part of our RS Andrews cool down, when I was looking at the news around, like, say, 10 a.m., it was Caleb Downs is going into the transfer portal, as one of our audience members said he's fixing to go in. Well, now fixing to go in seems like we're kind of moving into the Caleb Downs is actually in the transfer portal, that we don't know where he's going to go, or even if 100% sure he will leave Alabama. Obviously, he has the option to return. But this is getting more real by the second. It certainly seems like a very strong possibility that Caleb Downs will have a new home for the 2024 season, and Georgia would seem as likely a landing spot for him as anywhere. Is that your read on this situation right now?
That is correct. I think one thing to pay attention here, I know Pete Thamel got a lot of pub, Hayes Fawcett did as well. There was an account, Deuce Recruiting, that I think is very important to follow here, because Caleb Downs' father, I believe, is, if I have this correct, the scouting director for that service. And that before Thamel, before Fawcett put anything out, said that Downs was planning to enter the transfer portal. Being Downs' father is involved with that, I would take that to be a much more ironclad that he's intending to actually enter the transfer portal there. I will note.
Great source, by the way. Listen, you're a reporter. I don't think of myself that way. Everybody wants good sources. To have your own son as the source, I would say that pretty much trumps just about anything else you could possibly have there.
I think that is a good way to do it. Now, I will point out, BA, you jumping on bandwagons, you creating bandwagons, it's not been a great run of late. You came up with Brocktober. Brock Bowers gets hurt in the month of October.
Yeah.
Go for 3-23. The one loss Georgia has, they lose by 3 in the SEC championship game.
We're trying not to relive this, by the way, but thank you.
You go to the Georgia basketball game, and the only game that they have lost in their last 12 is the one that you were present for. I'm not saying, you can't talk about it. You can't hype it up. You can't discuss it. Don't put any double down on Downs shirts out there. Don't put any Downs ideas out there just yet. Let's make sure Georgia gets him on campus whenever that might be, because I think one important thing to follow here in these next coming steps, it's one thing for Georgia to land Caleb Downs, but I do think a big part of this puzzle is, when does he ultimately get to campus? Because I don't think it's an ironclad he's going to show up and play right away and be able to go in spring, because classes have already started at Alabama and drop ad period has already ended at Georgia, meaning, there are going to be some hoops that have to be gone through if Downs is to make it to Georgia right away and obviously go through spring practice. But having said all that, Caleb Downs is a good enough player to where he doesn't need to go through spring practice, and he will be out there for that first game of the year against Clemson in a major role for Georgia.
Yeah, to give you an idea how serious this is from a timeline standpoint, not only have classes already started at Alabama, all the students have already received their coloring books as well. So we're like well down.
Come on, B. I have some friends that they went to Alabama, briefly for part of undergrad, and then they ultimately transferred to UGA. It is a fine institution to start your college career at.
So let me ask you a serious question, because honestly, I don't know very much about this. Is there any way to get into Georgia this semester this late? Because we've been saying the entire time that, and I'm not saying this in a funny way, that it seems like we very rarely talk about academics anymore when it comes to player acquisitions, things like that. But when it comes to transfer portal, academics is still a very big deal, because the acceptance into a new school and sort of having the kind of, we call it course credit to allow you to be accepted is still a pretty big deal. So given timelines, given things like that, is there a backdoor way to get a schedule that would allow Downs to go through spring practice this late in the process at Georgia?
The only thing that I know of would be President Jerry Moorhead sort of signing off on this. It would have to go all the way to the top there. Now from an SEC standpoint, I think if Georgia is okay with this and allows it, I think they would be with it as well. These are pretty unprecedented circumstances with Saban retiring when he did, and that obviously impacting when kids can go into the portal and find new schools there. It's worth noting that Kalen DeBoer wasn't hired until Friday afternoon of drop ad week, and that was always going to make things very difficult if Downs wanted to have the time to make a fully informed decision on what he is going to do regarding his future there. So I think that's one of the big questions to follow there moving forward is, can he even withdraw from Alabama? And I do like to imagine that Alabama and schools involved will allow Downs to do this, given the unprecedented nature of Saban's retirement and when this happened. But I think that is certainly one of the major storylines to follow. It's not just Downs, where he goes to school next. I think when he goes to school and when he arrives there is another point to follow with this story.
The other thing is, and you and I touched on this in some of the shows we've done, they all run together at this point, but when Downs was a recruit, like, it was just sort of a non-starter, the idea that he would come to UGA. In fact, it seems like Ohio State probably took the silver medal in the initial recruiting battle here. We all see the video. We all see the photo, if I'm allowed to say, dapping up, Kirby kind of dapping up, Caleb Downs. And a lot of us take that to be a signal that the relationship between Downs and George is perhaps different this time around compared to what it was before.
I think something changed when Georgia missed out on Caleb Downs the first time.
Yeah.
I think you've seen in the way Georgia went about winning the KJ Bolden recruitment. I think that Kirby Smart has sort of, and you can even look at this with how they've gone about recruiting the 2025 cycle in the state of Georgia. And I think one thing to monitor with recruiting, I know we focus so much on just the next class, but so much of this legwork is done multiple years out. And the reality is with Caleb Downs, part of the elephant in the room, Caleb Downs' brother, Josh Downs, was a fantastic player at North Gwinnett High School. Went to North Carolina, had a very strong season for the Indianapolis Colts. Kirby Smart did not do a great job recruiting Josh Downs when Josh Downs was a high school prospect. And I believe the 2018 cycle, I'm doing some quick math there off the top of my head. And understandably, I think the recruitment of Josh Downs maybe factored a little bit into how Caleb Downs' recruitment went. But I think everyone has now seen the video. You point out the meme that Lane Kiffin shared on your show today. Kirby Smart, and you saw this play out exactly with the KJ Bolden recruitment where he first picked Florida State. And Kirby Smart stayed consistent. I have no doubts in my mind that Kirby Smart and his pitch with Caleb Downs stayed consistent in terms of going out and continuing to recruit him and saying, hey, we believe this is the best place for you. And there's an interesting, part of that video right after Kirby and Downs sort of embraced there at the end of the game. T-Rob comes over and daps up Kirby. That screenshot has been taken and added as well here. So it is all sort of tied together. And I do think it speaks to the larger point of in recruiting nowadays, you need to continue to recruit them even when you don't pick their school initially. And I think this Caleb Downs example is the most perfect one because Kirby has remained incredibly complimentary of Caleb Downs, gave a very glowing quote of Downs prior to the SEC championship game. And if Georgia ends up landing him, yes, NIL is going to be a big reason why. Travaris Robinson is going to be a big reason why. But Kirby's consistency, I think, in his recruitment and the way he has talked and viewed Downs should be seen in that way as well.
I think sometimes fans have an interesting reaction to stuff like this because there's no Georgia fan that wouldn't want Caleb Downs, as you correctly pointed out. This is one of the best players in the entire country, no matter where he plays in 2024. But there's this thought of, oh gosh, what does this mean for Janelle Aguero? Oh gosh, what does this mean for KJ Bolden? It's such an embarrassment of riches for Georgia at the safety position in the event that Downs were to come here that we're led to believe in this day and age of you can't have that much talent in one position. No one's going to be okay with that other than obviously Malachi Starks, who's playing and starting for anybody. But, for Aguero and Bolden, how would they perhaps react to this? So I'll ask you, how do you think KJ Bolden and Janelle Aguero perhaps view this if Downs does come in?
I mean, Aguero is a little bit more interesting because the spring transfer portal window does exist. He is from the state of Massachusetts. If he feels he's not going to have a chance to play this year, maybe he considers transferring to Boston College, an ACC school. But I think at the same point in time, Aguero and a lot of the kids that Georgia recruit, Aguero knows that Georgia's going to be going after KJ Bolden in the 2024 recruiting class. Whoever the top safety is in the 2025 recruiting cycle, KJ Bolden probably knows Georgia's targeting him. Georgia recruits at an elite level every year, and they're consistently bringing in great players. And so this shouldn't come as a surprise to them that they're going out and adding. They're adding a player like Caleb Downs. That's a little bit unprecedented. And so you maybe see that in a different light there. I think it's maybe, Aguero is a guy who he'd been in the program for 1 year. Bolden hasn't even played a snap yet for Georgia. I think those guys are a little different. I would look maybe at some of the older players on the roster in terms of, there potentially being an impact there. I know there's a lot of chatter about Ja'Cory Thomas and how he goes into this offseason, what expectations are for him. Landing Downs might make him someone who is maybe more susceptible to entering the transfer portal. And I don't want to openly speculate on anyone entering, but I would look more if you're looking and you're worried about roster retention. Kirby Smart has so stressed, keeping those guys for at least 2 to 3 years. I would look for guys that have been in the program longer to consider transferring first rather than some of those guys. And it's worth pointing out here as well, if those guys do want to transfer, they can't transfer within the SEC. That window has already opened and shut. And so those players will have to obviously wait until the April deadline and then look to play outside of the Southeastern Conference.
And we were already perhaps thinking about Janelle Aguero as a candidate at the star position, right? Which is nickelback. You're on the field the majority of the snaps anyway. Georgia plays far more frequently with 5 defensive backs than it does with 4. From a size standpoint, I don't know if KJ Bolden's quite big enough to do that. You probably have a better, feel of that than I do. But, there is an opportunity for a safety style player to be on the field as a nickelback, as a star. And in 2024, that's essentially a starter position anyway, just given how frequently Georgia shows that look.
Yeah, Georgia plays, I would say nickel at this point in time is probably Georgia's base defensive package. And they play with 6 defensive backs quite often there. So, you're going to be able to find playing time if you're one of those better players. I think with Aguero in particular, he was someone we thought at the beginning of the year would be able to push for playing time. He suffered an injury in the early part of the season, late part of the preseason. And I think we've seen now enough moving forward. If you have an injury in that August, early September window, it's the worst time of the year, I think, to have one if you're a young player, because it just makes the catch up that you have to make in season so much more difficult. There's a long lines of people, Darnell Washington comes to mind, I think, entering his 2021 season where he has that early season injury and it just never allowed him to have the season I think people thought he was capable of having. So I think with Aguero, it's going to be really interesting in seeing how he goes about and how committed he is to playing that star position. It is not necessarily the most glamorous. It doesn't, in my opinion, the way Georgia uses it translate to the NFL. And a nickelback in the NFL is very different from a nickelback in Georgia's system. But I think there's an opportunity for him to play right away. And there is a lot of overlap in terms of what safeties do there. And you look at Tyke Smith in the season that he had, he was an incredibly impactful defender for Georgia, an all SEC level player, someone who was around the football a lot and able to make plays. And when you have guys like Starks and Downs potentially in the back end, I think if you were someone like Janelle Aguero, the ability to be around the line of scrimmage and be around the ball is a way for you to make a name for yourself when you have, in my opinion, the two best safeties in college football behind you.
Let me do two things with you, Connor, and then we'll let you go. You've been kind to give us your time here today. Thing number one is this. The kind of the premise off the top of the show today is it almost seems like to me, and I know this is a bold statement, but Georgia's making moves right now that are perhaps even more aggressive of a pace than we've seen in the past. Helicopter landing at Mason Shorts High School shortly after his decommitment from Alabama. You've got online predictions for Elijah Griffin coming to UGA. Ewald, the defensive back who was recently committed to Michigan, he flips after taking the visit to Georgia. Now, the way the Caleb Downs thing is playing out, which we don't know how all this ends, but it certainly is a possibility for Georgia here right now, that this is the time of year in which we typically see Georgia being aggressive. But Connor, the pace with which they're moving and the kind of headlines with which we're seeing right now, this feels a little bit different even for Georgia. Kirby, to me, looks like he is really swinging for the fences right now.
I think Kirby Smart senses an opportunity in college football right now. Nick Saban retired, no longer coaching, best to ever do it. Guy that just won the national championship at Michigan, Jim Harbaugh, making it pretty clear he's interested in becoming an NFL head coach, interviewed with the Atlanta Falcons on Tuesday. There's an opportunity here as college football moves into a 12-team playoff, a new format, to sort of establish yourself as the premier program. And I think Kirby Smart senses that. I think he knows he is a team that can possibly win the national championship this year. And if we're able to continue to do that and win 3 and 4, you parlay that into further sustained success and show that you can continue to develop and recruit at an elite level and sort of keep the wheel moving, even in an era where you're seeing more and more roster turnover than ever. And so I think that is sort of, Ohio State is doing something similar in my mind with them, I think, really ponying up to bring back a lot of the guys that wouldn't have been necessarily been first-round draft picks, would have been middle-round draft picks in my mind, but Ryan Day has done, I think, a very good job of getting those guys to come back for another year. I think Georgia and Ohio State, coincidentally, the two teams that are best positioned to land Caleb Downs, are making it very clear that we're pushing in different ways, obviously, to establish ourselves as the top team in the sport right now. Because, and you touched on this in your show as well, I think Caleb DeBoer is a very good coach. He can be a good coach at Alabama and still be a step back from where Nick Saban was. And I think, and I'm not the first person to make this point, I think with Kalen DeBoer, his on-field excellence as a coach and a game day manager, I think is going to try and help Alabama cover up for some of the roster losses that they're experiencing right now. And Bud Elliott made this point as well. Alabama maybe making the playoff this year was maybe one of the worst things to happen for them because of the timing of all this. And if Saban was already thinking of retiring, maybe he does that in December, and that allows them to be more active in the portal themselves rather than what we have seen where people are just coming in and rating their roster. Caleb Downs, I think, being the latest example of that.
So the last thing then, and if you've got a final thought, I'll let you certainly have it. It certainly seems like for Alabama, it's hard to overstate how big of a disaster this would be. So much so that I still sort of wonder, does somebody swoop in at the last minute and put the kind of deal together that allows them to keep Downs? Because you want to talk about just taking a coach out at the knees right as he begins his coaching tenure. To have the report from the ESPN reporter the other day be, hey, Downs wants to see the hires that DeBoer makes, and then he's going to decide to go in the portal. DeBoer brings in a bunch of guys essentially no one knows, the Buffalo head coach, the South Alabama head coach. These are really not famous names. And to have Downs basically give you the sort of thumbs down on that and then move on, that would really be a tough blow for DeBoer right at the beginning of his career. Now, you didn't hire him to coach Caleb Downs. You hired him to coach the next 10 years. But still, in terms of the momentum that you need to build right away, losing your best player like this in such a sort of cold and ruthless manner, it'd be a really, really tough look for DeBoer. Am I overstating that?
It's going to be a lot for him to overcome. Now, he did that at Washington, turned them around in their first year, going from a 4-win team to an 11-win team, winning the Alamo Bowl, beating Texas. But with the timing of all this, it's going to make it difficult. Now, Alabama still has a lot of talent. I think they're still a team capable of making the college football playoff next year. But in terms of being a team that could win the college football playoff, team that is seen as a yearly contender, there's a lot of work to be done there. And when Mike Krzyzewski walked away from Duke, he took a year-long victory lap and, was widely panned for it. I understand that. I get all that. And college basketball is obviously a very different sport than college football. I know Nick Saban, felt he couldn't do this job to the best of his ability anymore. And you certainly get that and you understand that. I almost wonder if Alabama wishes that they could have talked him into doing a victory lap and making this upcoming 2024 season his sort of one last ride, do it as a year-long celebration while allowing them to get their ducks in a row so that when it came time next offseason to be active in the portal, to have a plan to pitch to recruits, they would be better adept at doing that, whether that means making Tommy Rees the sort of interim caretaker there and you try and hold the staff together or whatnot. I think you're seeing right now the plan of Saban's abrupt retirement and even bringing in a coach that got to a national championship game, Caleb DeBoer, is just going to make things very, very difficult for Alabama in the short term in terms of being a true championship elite level team. They're still going to be one of the best teams in the country. I'll be interested in seeing what Jalen Milroe looks like in this system next year, but you look at where Alabama has been dominant for so long, especially in that secondary. I believe they've had five defensive backs already enter the transfer portal. And of guys that were on the roster this year, they only have 5 defensive backs coming back. They're going to be very young in the secondary. I think it's going to be a really interesting year for Alabama. And, Kalen DeBoer did a great job coaching this past year in my mind and getting Washington to where they did. Some of us saw foresight that he would be able to do so. Not everyone necessarily believed. If he's able to get Alabama into the playoff next year and have them as a team, in the quarterfinals, semifinals, possibly, I actually think as we sit here today on January, when it looks like they're going to lose Caleb Downs, that somehow be an even more impressive job than getting a Washington team with no 5-star talent to the national championship game.
All right, a couple of things here to reset the news. We had talked about this as a possibility. Now it's a reality. Caleb Downs, best player at Alabama, former 5-star safety from Mill Creek High School, is in the transfer portal. Georgia's expected to be in the mix here. We'll figure out what happens next on that. Connor, I want to give you the last word, but I also want to say to show what you know. You kind of mocked me for my Georgia basketball bandwagon status a little earlier. Road Warriors last night in Columbia, going in there, House of Horrors, coming away with a win against a team that only lost twice previously all year long. The Mike White bandwagon here will not be mocked. We will not be mocked.
I'm going to give Mike White a lot of credit here. There was a lot of initial criticism when he was first hired because I think a lot of people – they wanted the big home run swing. And in my mind, this program was in such a dumpster from when Tom Crean had it that the goal, I think, was to get to respectability, get to a place where, okay, making the NCAA tournament, you might not be a team that is advancing the second weekend every year, but you're a team that if you have the right pieces around you and you have the right chips, you can be a respectable program. You win a couple games you're not supposed to, you can find yourself in the NCAA tournament conversation. There's still obviously a long way to go with that. Georgia's got a tough SEC schedule. The best teams that they're going to play are still ahead of them. Obviously, Tennessee, one of them, a tough loss this past Saturday, which you were on hand for. But Mike White, I think he's done a really good job of identifying good players out of the transfer portal that can help cover some needs now, while also finding the right players in the recruiting rankings and building through the high school rankings. Silas Demery was a guy that played huge minutes for them last night and is, in my opinion, one of their better players. Blue Kane is a guy that's come off the bench for them and made big shots there. So he's building this up the right way. And I just want to caution here. I know everyone is excited about the idea of making the NCAA tournament for the first time since 2015. And that, for so many people, is the barometer of success. Are you making the NCAA tournament? Even if Georgia doesn't make the NCAA tournament, they could still very well go on to do so. Winning on the road in the SEC is tough, and they've already done that twice. So I think one of the things to watch going forward with this team is, are they making the steps towards being a respectable program? Are you winning your home games? Are you making things difficult on the road? Mike White has already done that, considering in Tom Crean's last year, they won 6 total games and just one in the SEC. They're already 3-1. This has been a very, very good job for Mike White already. And I'm interested in seeing how this Georgia team uses this strong start in SEC play to continue to build off that. They got a tough road game at Kentucky after that, but they have a fairly winnable stretch of games: LSU at Florida, Alabama at home coming up after that. So if they're able to continue this and continue to stack wins, if you're able to get to 10 SEC wins in conference, that's going to leave you in position where you're potentially waiting on Selection Sunday to find out whether or not you make it. And I think if you had told anyone a month ago that that was maybe a possibility for this Georgia team, I don't know how many people would have taken you seriously. So Mike White has already done the job in my mind that he was brought to Georgia to do. And if he continues to build in the right way, as he is shown to do, they already have a 5-star prospect in next year's class in Ace and Newell. I think that's something that's very encouraging, not just for this season for Georgia basketball, but the long-term health of the program as well.
How about a final thought on the down stuff? Anything that we haven't brought up that we should have?
Yeah, I stress again, plans to enter the transfer portal is the verbiage being used right now, not officially in. Georgia fans know that with Daniel Harris and Julian Humphrey, that this is going to be a story to continue to watch here. As you pointed out, they were the runner-up for Downs in his initial recruitment there. But if Georgia lands him, and I saw this on Twitter, somebody had mentioned, this will be like a new age Greg Blue and Thomas Davis at the safety position. No disrespect to Greg Blue and Thomas Davis, two very good players. Thomas Davis obviously went on to a great NFL career. Greg Blue, one of the most beloved 2000s Georgia Bulldogs. This might be not just the best safety combination in Georgia history, from an athleticism standpoint, from an NFL potential standpoint. This might be one of the great safety tandems in the history of college football if you're able to get both Malachi Starks and Caleb Downs in the same secondary there. Caleb Downs is, in my opinion, the best player to enter the transfer portal this offseason. The fact that you get him for at least 2 more years, he has 3 years of eligibility left, makes him, in my mind, the clear number one player. This guy was the best freshman in the country last season and would, again, Georgia's already, in my mind, the number one, maybe the number 2 team in the country to start next season. If you go out and add a player like Caleb Downs to your secondary and shore up your defense in the back end even further, this is slowly morphing into, and I know it's a new year, but looking like a championship or bust season when you have guys like Starks and you have someone like Downs in your secondary.
All right, Connor, great stuff. We appreciate that. I know you'll have plenty more coming at DawgNation.com. And in the event this becomes official, I'm sure we'll have some more stuff to say at that point in time, too. So a lot of fun here right now. And I guess eventually there'll be an off season. I don't quite know when that's going to take place, but eventually it'll be here, maybe. But anyway, I appreciate you hopping on, being a part of this, and we'll look forward to catching up with you again very soon, too.
I'm going to knock on wood here, but I think Caleb Downs could potentially be the last domino to fall until we get into the offseason. So we're close. We're there. And, look, if and when it does happen, we'll come on and talk about it with you as we have today. Thank you so much, BA.
Yeah, good stuff there, Connor. And everybody here is part of our RS Andrews cooldown, too. I know not a lot of comments here right now, but we're going to have to pop off here because we got 1,000 things going on. So we'll be back live. We'll take more of your comments tomorrow. Did just want to kind of give the news as we understood it because I know that we were live a little earlier. We weren't able to do that. So I'm going to take like one spin around the comment section just to say hello to folks. And then obviously we'll try to make this up to you a little bit after that. Caleb Janney says that Greg Blue was a hit stick, and you better believe, going back to his time at UGA, he was no doubt that. And obviously, Davis and Blue together brings back good memories. But as Connor said, from an NFL potential standpoint, if Downs were to come to Georgia, if this were to become real, pairing him with Malachi Starks is like not only unlike anything that's ever happened at Georgia before, it is quite possibly unlike anything that's ever happened in college football before. That is how significant that would be. Over here on the YouTube side of things, Foster Moss says, please don't speak on Downs at all. Listen, I'm not bad luck like that. Now, the Brocktober thing did not go well. Admittedly, mistakes were made. Go for 3-23, many such cases, right? I mean, we've had our issues as of late, but over the course of years, we've also sort of hit on some things we spoke into existence as well. So in the case of Downs, we are treading lightly, but it certainly seems like this is going in a pretty good direction here for UGA. We will absolutely say that. Let's see what else. Good to see Bo Molinari, one of our old buddies from the old days of SEC Country Live, checking in over here today. Bo, we're glad to have you over here. Thanks for showing up, Bo. I'm happy you're in here today. Army Dog Charlie comes to my defense, by the way, saying that I am not bad luck because there's no such thing as a jinx. There you go, Army Dog. I appreciate that. It's great to hear from you. Spencer Clark says one of the most exciting safeties, Trey Battle. Yeah, we actually caught up with Trey Battle not too long ago. That was a really enjoyable thing. Battle's a great guy, and was great to catch up with him. Really enjoyed that. Let's see what else. Philip Jordan Wells says that Brocktober felt like overkill. We're only saying that now because it just didn't work out very well. At the time, we were all in a good mood about that. Let's go back and remember. Barry Watkins also coming to my defense as not being bad luck, so I certainly appreciate that. Joel Moody, not afraid to get out in front of this. He says, I'm going to be the first one to say it. If we get Caleb Downs, it is over for everyone else. So there you go. Some of y'all want me to tread lightly, but Joel Moody has no such misgivings about putting himself out there on that. And I don't disagree with Joel about how much fun this would obviously be for UGA. Quite an exciting time, as we discussed on today's show, with all of the major pursuits that Georgia has going on right now in both recruiting and still a big name out there left in the transfer portal. This could get very, very interesting. So stay close to DawgNation. We're going to be watching it for you closely. And obviously, a big thanks to our friends at RS Andrews for making the RS Andrews cooldown possible. RS Andrews, the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs, showing up on time, doing the work that's promised. The price is promised. Very cold heating systems. They can get it tuned back up for you to factory fresh specs. It may only cost you $99. Make sure you find out more online at rsandrews.com. Okay, we're going to step away for now. Back tomorrow. Moving pieces all over the place. We're having a great time, though. So we'll talk to you then. DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management.